from their encounters with races from other planets. The information is the activation. Let's awaken this world together. We are the forever students, and we will not be silent. We are the ones that we've been waiting for. It's pretty wild. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to Full Spectrum Universe. I am your host, Rob Yox. We are the embattled broadcast from behind enemy lines in the once great state of New York. And bada bing, bada boom. Look who's back in the room. It's this guy right here. Well, I'm just so excited to be here. I know we took a couple of days off. That is not for the purpose of what you think. What we're doing is I had to go get a new job because I really, really am, in this position where you have to make money to support a household, of course. So within doing that, it was very difficult for me to expand projects with this show. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to, we're listener supported, and all the donations and memberships are with love and appreciation. We accept them, and truly it's a fantastic thing. And I really, really love and appreciate all of you. But, I don't want to just rely on that money for expansion. I want to add some myself to the coffers as well, so we can motivate and move into directions that some platforms have never even seen before, right? I want to make sure that we have things that we're working on in the background, such as an app. When I get this app all shored up and finished, it's going to be one of the best things that you've ever seen. I can promise you that. It's the type of app that I would like to have, and I would like to essentially have on my phone to access information at any time or any point during the day. So there's a lot going on in the back. Also, I want to put together some in-person events as well as, online events too. And what that costs is tremendous amounts of money. So it's always good to have more revenue flowing into the broadcast to make sure that we expand at a healthy rate, but also it's also a way that we can access more information. And it's truly incredible what's at the tips of our fingers when we think about it, right? And I wanted to just say that first and foremost, again, we're also working on scheduling with this new job. We're going to be working on scheduling of doing shows. I know we've been doing every other night. I'm going to try my best to keep that up. Some of the shows will be pre-recorded because I'll probably be at work. So if it's not exactly live in the sense of me being there doing it, it's still going to be the same type of atmosphere, right? We're still going to do it the same exact way. We're going to really, really take things to the next level here. And I'm moving my mic because it seems like it's not in the right position. So tonight is a night that we're going to talk about one of the most bastardized ET races in all of Earth, right? Of this whole planet. We're talking about the Zeta Reticulan tonight. Now, remember what I talk about all the time in the sense of there is various shades of gray when it comes to these extraterrestrial bodies, right? Because they don't see it as sometimes good or evil. Sometimes they do. But usually each one of these races has factions that reside on both sides, or there's some directly in the middle. And one of the reasons why I loved looking into the Zeta Reticuli is because they are ultimately neutral. They don't like to be involved unless asked. And while there is factions on both sides, when we look at the entities as a whole, it kind of changes our perspective, right? And when it changes our perspective, what it does is it gives us a broader understanding of why they do what they do and who they truly are. Thank you, Lisa. Much appreciated. Really, really love that. That's so great. Thank you, Lisa. Um, so I dove in with a healthy dose of cynicism and basically detaching myself from what my beliefs are of the Zeta Reticuli because I wanted to get a better understanding of who I thought they were without some program narrative in my head saying that, oh, they're all bad. They mutilate the cows. They do this. They do that. And I tried to focus in on why they do what they do and who they might be. And if there was good or bad, what what really drives both sides. And the funny part about that is it's sort of similar, but it's all about perspective, right? I've said enough so far. Let's jump into a little bit of what we're talking about. So first, you know how we do it. Let's bring up the slides. Let's bring up the slides. I'm so excited to be here. You know, when I first got this job, it was going to be very difficult for me to juggle both. So I have to figure out scheduling, but now I've got it down and I'm very, very excited for what the future holds for us. And another thing, before we jump into that, I just want to say this too. The full spectrum family or the forever student family that we have on Telegram is just blowing my mind, right? There's people in there sharing all of this incredible information. It's not a place where people get censored or, you only have to listen to my information and that's what we're going to talk about. No, we're sharing information across the world right now. There's people from all over the world in there. It's up to 130 people, which you would think is not a lot. But a lot of these people are very active. So it becomes conversation. We're building bridges. We're not taking things apart. We're not being divisive. We're building and we're going to keep building. And that excites me. That makes me feel like we are on the right path and we're doing what we were meant to be doing here, especially in this time, right? So I want to say to everybody, I appreciate those people as well. I appreciate everybody here because together we are making that difference. And while sometimes we talk about the extraterrestrial races, the galactical histories, we take with it what we need to help others into the future. There's pertinent information everywhere. How many times I've watched a show and then somebody had a conversation about something that was political or something else, and what I heard within that show kind of gave me perspective to essentially engage in that conversation and change minds in a sense of, not saying change minds as if they're a believer or not believer, whatever the case is. I was able to interject and kind of broaden the perspectives and the horizons of those people. So this is what we're trying to accomplish here. So enough about what I'm saying. Let's get to the information because information is everything. So before we start and we start talking about it, I want everybody to take a deep breath again. Take that deep breath. And all that you know about the Zeta Reticuli, I want you to disregard it right now. Throw it out. And I'm not saying that what I'm saying is 100% right, but I promise you, you're going to be thinking by the end of this episode. Okay? Throw it all out. All programs and preconceived notions, get rid of it. Get rid of it. This information is the activation, Omar, and it is wild. Absolutely. Love it. I love it. So, first, we jump into the place of origin, right? So we were looking at who are these people, right? Where do they come from? That's remember, the reason why I start with this all the time is because I tell people a man or a woman who doesn't know where they come from is a man or a woman lost. So, you know, there's a lot of confusion with the Zeta Reticuli, especially on Earth. And it's concerning the Zeta Reticuli. They're not inherently an aggressive or even impolite race, but they are a complex society and they have complex emotional patterns. Like Earthlings, maybe even more than that, there's causes a wide variety of outlooks and behavioral patterns within this society. Primarily, a unified people are nevertheless, you know, essentially on the same wavelength. But there's splinter groups and factions who operate with considerable gusto within these greater societies, right? The most important splinter group of the Zeta Reticuli is called the Greys, or who we know as the Greys, and whose purpose on Earth is radically different than the Zetas as a whole. We're going to call them Zetas, right? The Greys are a faction. The Zetas are the entire species. So while there is a small faction of Zeta Reticulans called the Greys who act in specific manners, not all of them believe that that's the way it should be. Majority of them don't. So let's move into the place of origin. These beings are a product of the universe. They are originally developed in a Zeta Reticuli binary star system, which is about 39 light years from Earth, relatively close in the grand scheme of things, right? And we're going to show you a map at the very end that's going to show you where all the different races kind of stem from. Okay, let's move on. So, first thing I wanted to know was what their dimensional perspective was. And dimensional perspective is essentially where do they reside frequency wise? Do they exist in the seventh density? Do they exist in the eighth density? Now, while most extraterrestrial races reside within the fifth density, the Zeta Reticuli, while some do reside in that fifth, are primarily in the 3D to 4D, with evolving into 5D dimensional perspective. That's how they reside majority of the time, which makes it ideal to interact with people on Earth and other planets. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk about too is that there are different factions within the Zeta Reticuli. We know that because we've been talking about it. So the Zeta Reticulan is the first faction. This is the Zetas almost as a whole, but it's not. There's the Zetas and then the Zeta Reticulans, right? The Reticulans are sort of different than all the different Zetas. While they're all called Zeta Reticulans, it's very confusing. But I'm going to talk about three different factions tonight. So the Zeta Reticulans are short grays. They're 4.5 feet tall. And we're going to talk about who these short grays are, right? So the short grays are from the Bernard star in Zeta Reticuli. This is the type most commonly referred to as the grays themselves. Now, another great point is even these short grays reside, of course, in that gray area. There's good grays and then there's bad grays. So even though we're calling them, so everything splinters at this point. They're also known as the Zeta Reticulans from Zeta Reticulan star system, the Bernard star, neighboring the Orion area. They function in a mode that is apparently military in nature with rigid defined social structure, and they hold science and consciousness to be the prime movers of their society. They're normally between 4 to 5 feet tall with large heads and almond black eyes. They have limited facial features, a slit mouth, no nose, and essentially what that does is it's very difficult to, let's say they did have emotional patterns or they went through a emotional cycle. Because of their facial structure, it's very difficult to understand any emotion coming off of these beings, but they have ways of expressing that emotion, and we're going to talk about that too. Now, here's where, and again, we have to keep this in the gray, right? So we're just talking about them as a whole. The They have evolved beyond the need for reproductive and digestive systems. They reproduce by cloning. The service to self factions have genetics that is partly based in insectoidal genetics. And it is the Greys working closely with the Alpha Draconis, who are quote unquote the bad aliens in most of the Earthling news reports and ufology. But, you know, to say that it doesn't do justice because there are people who reside on the other side. So while some of these grays, now the grays as themselves, if I had to take it as a whole, majority fall in the Alpha Draconis ally area. And we're going to talk about that a little bit further later on. But there are some of these grays who don't agree with that system that come from the Bernard Star and have maneuvered themselves to be more benevolent than malevolent, right? So we go to the next type of gray, which is the tall grays from Orion. These gents are, again, reside on both sides of the fence. They are a little bit more, I guess, advanced in the way of culture and kind of like social interactions. So the tall grays from Orion, and that's at the star which they reside, or the planet, is called Regal, standing at approximately 7 to 8 feet tall, are hairless and pale. They're the gray masters are the ambassadors of most meetings between the human and alien forces. They represent both human and gray biological material combined, and therefore they play a lead role in assisting the short grays with interacting with humanity. This species is involved in many genetic experimentations, and there has now been a hybrid human gray race created. While both factions are using this hybrid style program to create a hybrid race. Now, here's where we splinter off, because while the ones that stand on the benevolent side or try to do service to others are also creating a gray or a Zeta Reticulan human hybrid, while the ones that are not of service to self and are service or not service to others and are of service to self are also creating their own hybridization program. Now, the end goals of these programs are different, and here's where I'm going to bring it back to me for a second. Here's where things get a little bit crazy, right? And it's going to sound like, well, what the hell is he talking about? So we see these abductions happening for genetic materials. Now, some may be of the light and some may be of the dark, right? Both have a goal of human hybridization. One of the goals of the good guys, quotations again, is to take humanity in a galactical leap forward into the galactic alliance and councils across the stars. Now the other want to use it to sort of capitulate humanity, right? They're making these creations to sort of replace humanity, not to enhance them. And that's where we're starting to get into these different, like, you know, these different areas of like who's where and what's what and why. And they have reasons for it, but of course, we're not always privy to those reasons. We're going to go over a little bit of what I truly believe is happening out there, and at the same time, it's gonna boggle your mind a little bit, because you're going to be like, well, wait a minute. If both sides are doing it and the end goal is different, how come they're not kind of going after each other, or one is trying to outpace the other? And it's because there's a lot more players involved than just the Zeta Reticulans themselves. They're We're going to get to it. I don't want to give too much out before we get into the details, because it's all about the details. So as we keep going. So the service to self contained mind control and diplomatic agreements with shadow government of the tall grays, to which they represent. The service to others represent a program to give humans a galactical leap into the galactical community, which again we'll discuss a little bit later. And sources claim that they originate from a star system in the Orion constellation, as opposed to the first ones we talked about. The tall grays supervise all human abductions and human experimentation, but are seldom present during these events. They prefer to employ the service of the short grays, as it would be. It seems that they're keen on developing a stable human gray hybrid race, one worthy of inheriting the earth, right? So that can be seen two ways: inheriting the earth in a way that's not so good, or inheriting the earth in a way that kind of, you know, jumps us into another evolution, which is actually happening, right? We know that our genetics are made up of various races from across the stars. So they could be, influxing their genetics into our race to become part of this staple of who we are, like all the other races did. So, well, it can go both ways, and I'm not saying I agree or disagree with it. So, but the service to self factions are advanced, self-centered races, basically, and they place little value on human life. They consider us property as opposed to equals, which the ones that reside in service to others don't see it that way. They see it quite the opposite. All right. So there's a third type of gray that we want to talk about, and we just discussed them a moment ago, and that's the short grays from Bellatrix in Orion. Now, these guys are a little bit different than the rest of them, right? They're more of the lackeys to the tall grays, these guys. And there isn't a lot of diversity when it comes to who sides with, like, when I'm saying this is within the grays themselves, ones that we coined the grays, the 4.5 foot tall ones we described first. There's more of the duality of service to self and service to others. But in the tall grays, majority of them are service to self with a small smattering of service to others. Same goes with the short grays. The short grays are more service to self, and there's a small smattering of service to others in that time, right? So this is what I mean by the duality of things. We have to be able to kind of give context, but not hold every component of that society to that. We have to kind of look at it in a gray until we, because it's all about individuality and free will, right? We can't say that they are one way or the other without truly knowing it. So the third type of gray, the short grays from Bellatrix are the shortest of the grays and tend to be around 3.5 feet tall. Their facial features are very similar to the Zeta Reticuli grays and are from the same root race as they are. They are just as hostile to humans as the tall grays are. They are from the star system near the shoulder of Orion called Bellatrix. They are apparently kinder than some of their even shorter counterparts, which stand 1 to 1.5 feet tall. There are grays that go through the whole entire spectrum of height, but the shorter they are, the more it seems as if they people say that the meaner they are for some reason. The shortest of the grays are the ones that are almost sinister to a point, but it gets a little bit, the short grays from Bellatrix are a little bit more of the hidden peoples. You don't hear a lot about them because they're, like I said, they're foot soldiers, right? So let's keep going. So now we're going to talk about the evolution of the grays. And this is something that was a little bit eye-opening to me. And basically this society is ahead of us by a few million years. They started in their star system and have become space travelers and spend much of their existence in space, which is why there's such a variety of appearances. It's because of their extensive space travel, and the different environments and their adaptation to them. Also, they're very good at genetic experimentation, which is sort of something that we see across almost all the races. But because of this, and traveling through space and even time, they look the way that they do because of that fact, and they come in so many different shapes and sizes because of that fact as well. So, however, though, since they became aware a long time ago that their consciousness is not their physical container, they consciously move into different bodies at will, right? They tend to stick with a form that suits their job or role at any given time, but then they can transfer very easily. They're highly technologically and scientifically advanced. Various gray species have different histories, and some are known to have emphasized their focus on technology to the detriment of other qualities. But now things are a little bit different. Most have now evolved to be able to integrate with their technology in a symbiotic relationship and have learned to balance their spirituality and their technology dependency, which is something that we're kind of on the influx in right now as a species. We're dependent on technology, but now our consciousness is kind of re evolving to that point. And this is one of the things that makes looking into the Zeta Reticuli so interesting, is because they are very similar to who we are at a root in the soul, right? And a root in consciousness. they're facing a lot. They faced already a lot of the crises which we face now. So one of the reasons it's amazing and it's pretty wild to look into this specific race is because we can learn from their adventures and their mistakes and try and make sure that we don't end up on the same type of trajectory as they did at one point before they were more consciousnessly advanced, right? So they understand that their tools also have consciousness and they work with that consciousness. These beings have been evolved with have beings have I'm sorry, I'm choking a little bit, have been involved with the evolution of many third dimensional species, including humans. Because of their advances in genetic engineering and their ability to still work within that 3D environment. So they're one of the best, I guess you could say, leeways or the kind of the best ambassadors to send to a culture who stands within that 3D position, and they can essentially interact with them at a way that somebody who might be in the 7D in the seventh dimension can't, right? It can truly be a little bit daunting with this information of how they help people, because so much of what we heard is how bad they are and how much they hurt people and their end goal games and things like that. What we should be doing is we should be learning from them. Maybe not taking up their position or even becoming allied with them, but learning, right? Learning is the key. Being able to function in some of the ways that they do with their symbiosis with technology, while their consciousness, I believe, should rule above all else. Technology is a side note. And when we get to this inherent time period where transhumanism is running wild, especially in America, it gets to be this point of whose hands are on the technology, right? Technology can be used to clear the oceans of all pollutants, clear the air of all pollutions, right? To help feed people across the planet. But it's all about whose hands are on the controls, right? That's the game. That's the game. And that's the game they want to hide from us because they don't want you to think that. They want you to think that that technology is the next big thing. Have your phone on you at all times, even though it may cause cancer because of the waves and the microwaves that come off of it. Keep that phone up against your head. But, you know, also we could get into the different technologies for energy, right? We could solve the world's energy problem with 3 different steps, and they know how, but they won't, but they won't. It's whose hands are on the control, right? So, again, to get back to the information. Okay. So, they've helped a lot of species in the 3rd dimension to basically enhance their environments around them, to help them sort of get used to the galactic side of things. They're usually the first encounter of a species before a lot of the other ones reveal themselves. And they actually get contracted to do that. The Galactic Federation uses them to bridge their gaps, right? This is what they're used for. This is something that they excel at. So let's keep going. So the qualities of the grays, right? And this is where consciousness comes into play, because these abilities that they have wouldn't be they wouldn't be able to utilize them if they couldn't, right? They're telepathic, they're telekinetic, they have a high mental function, and even though they appear emotionless, experts at reading frequency they also are. They don't need physical expression, right? For or they don't need physical expression just to also relay information or feeling to you. They're telepathic and telekinetic, right? They're scientific problem solvers. They see through time and space and they can transform energies. This is what their specialties are, right? We're going to get to a little bit more of a refined specialty a little bit later, but they specialize in these things. So, who do you send to a planet whose energies are all out of whack? There's good, there's bad, there's inflation, there's energy everywhere. You send the people who transform energies to become more unified, right? You send the people who solve problems because while Earth is a hospital planet, we need the doctors or the so called leaders to show us examples of how to fix these problems to help to help other people. While it's all inside of us, if we don't know how to access it, we need people to show us how to access it. We need examples, and this is where they come into play. This is truly just something that's it's boggling my mind, right? Because I sit here and think of all the different things that I've heard about how terrible they were, and now come to find out, it seems as if they're are one of our best strategies for achieving a more higher independent cognate society because they have these abilities, right? So let us keep going. Now we're going to go to the actual abilities themselves, right? And I found a treasure trove of pictures of Zeta Reticulans, and I'm like, this is amazing. So the Zetas can integrate with the consciousness of anything, right? All those people who said that they've been abducted and the Zetas didn't talk to them, they interacted with them telepathically. So they can get into anybody's mind if they wanted to, or they can interact with anybody's consciousness, right? I believe at one point that essentially that humans were speaking only telepathically, and that's how they were communicating. So maybe this is an inherent ability that we will have once our frequencies raise to that 5D, 6D kind of mentality, right? So their ships and equipment respond to their telepathic communication, and their ships and equipment are considered living beings. They're also time travelers. They can shift from 3D to 4D and can move others through these dimensions as well by shifting their frequency. They operate from heightened emotional states and thus are not influenced by denser emotions. They can manipulate energy fields, which allows them to heal and create mental projections and alter sensations. Pretty wild, right? I think that that's pretty wild. So let us keep moving on. Now we're going to talk about the specialties of the Greys. And whenever I talk about specific entities, right, and really go into the dichotomy of who these people are, even if they are terrible, terrible races, right? I like to try and find the good in them because that's inherently who I am. And I try and find wonder and amazement in some of the things that they may have done or are doing. A lot of it is contingent on the fact that they are not hurting people to do it, right? But when we look at all these different societies and how these cultures came to be, we can marvel in some of their potential. We can marvel in some of the things that they bring to the table while they may not be the best people to be marveling at, right? So we're not giving them a pass by exploring some of the fundamentals of their society, which could inherently lead them to a better position, right? I want to make that clear. So we're talking about specialties. The Zetas are called upon for upgrading species from 3D to 4D. They do this with genetic methods to which there is an energetic component, and through teaching spiritual principles to help species learn to use their psychic acumen, right? They are evolutionary helpers and are also guardians to watch over a species' progress. Zetas also assist with modulating starseed energies to integrate with 3D physical bodies for incarnation. Now, a lot of people don't understand that that might be how we got here. Was a Zeta was assisting in that. That potential to me sounds incredible, right? And maybe that's one of the reasons why we're able to sense our starseed self now, right? Because this last time around, it was a Zeta, you know? It was a Zeta potentially that could have done that. So I think it's pretty wild. I see that somebody's getting upset that well, I'm not reading the chat. Well, I'm kind of going into what I'm talking about. If you have a question, put it in caps lock and we will address it at the end, right? I'm trying to go ahead and give a feeling, not just a sermon, right? So while I understand there's perspective coming in, I'm kind of giving you something that's a little bit detached from emotion and trying to just give you what I see when I look at this research. And you know what? It's okay. It's okay. I understand everybody. So there's mods in the chat. But again, if you have a question, put it in caps lock so I catch it. Okay? That's how I catch things and I can answer them later. So also I address specific things in the chat. Sometimes I don't because it might not be where the information is going, right? Thank you again, Lisa. I really, really appreciate that. You're incredible, Lisa. Thank you so much. So now thinking about all of that they've done to progress a species, we have to think about our timeline. How many times do we see the Zetas pop up, right? How many times do you hear about them interacting with Earth or with humans? How many people say that they've been visited by Zetas, they've been taken by the Zetas? How many government officials reference the Zetas when they talk about disclosure, right? Now, well, we're not waiting on them for disclosure, right? We see that this is a not just a fly by night kind of conversation. They've been referenced in some of the biggest political campaigns and some of the biggest stories of inter extraterrestrial relations that we have on this planet is done or seen through the eyes of the opposing person, which is the Zeta. So we see how incredibly rich the tapestry is of our history with the Zetas. And again, we could if all these Zetas were so malevolent, right? And there weren't some good ones, we might not be here right now. Their technology is millions of years surpassed ours, right? But I don't believe that there's entities out there that truly want to destroy this planet, except for some of the archons. And there's a specific group of, sleazy aliens out there that want control like everybody else. But there's also a bigger group of people on the adverse side of that who are also looking out for this planet as well. So we don't have to sit here in a collective of fear. This is why I'm never afraid. This is why I never let my mind go to that place. And yours shouldn't either. Because they're here to help majority. The ones that don't want to help most likely don't come to humans unless they need something, unless they want to infiltrate something, right? And sometimes they can do that. But majority of the time, I think interactions are not what they seem and they might be misunderstood. So let's keep going. So we're going to talk about now the focus of the grays. Okay. The focus of the grays is something that's a little bit, it can be controversial because, again, there's two sides to this coin, right? Advancement and species in evolution. The Zetas are excited and motivated by evolution and the integration of species and how the soul can evolve by means of experiencing different forms. Involvement with Earth. The Zetas have been involved with Earth periodically since the first life forms were established here, and with humanity since the earliest evolutionary leaps. They have always been here as guardians and aides in our development and assisting with DNA upgrades. They have been oh, they have been asked by the galactic councils to create an Earth human Zeta hybrid in order to help the humans leap to a new level of consciousness and further the ongoing universal human expression, right? Now, this is the good side of the coin. Now, they're not forcing it upon people most of the time. Sometimes the bad ones do, but they're inherently trying to inject their genetics to the already majority of 22 other races have injected their genetics into the human being. So now it's kind of their turn, I guess, if we have to put it that way. The Zetas have obtained a reputation for their much misunderstood abductions and human experiments. It has been surmised by many that they do these abductions to obtain DNA from human beings in order to prolong their own species. But I don't think that that's the truth. I think it's actually far from the truth. They already have skill to clone their bodies, which are well adapted for space travel and shifting their souls into those new bodies. They are far from a dying species. They do not feel fear the way humans do, and thus they appear cold to this in their emotions. It's seen by many beings that fear is a detriment to human evolution and galactic relations. Hence, this is one of the attributes that the Zetas are attempting to diminish in the new hybrids. And it's true that these hybrids will not exist on Earth alone, and that the Zeta beings will, in some cases, transfer their consciousness into hybrids, as will Earth souls. They are meant to be an evolutionary leap of potential expression for many in the universe to experience. And if you think this is playing God, then, you know, maybe in some ways it might be, but in some ways it may not be, right? So it's up for perspective. And it truly becomes this whose hands are on the wheel moment, right? Who's actually playing the cards here? Who's the dealer? Is it the good guys or is it the bad guys or is it somebody who lies right in between and it doesn't matter, right? So we look at these Zetas as most of the people on Earth would see them as an enemy. And that's funny because most of the people who garner persecution, especially, on this planet, most of the time are not that bad at all. They just see things in a different way. And we have to understand and open up to the ability to see as they do onto us, as we do onto them, right? It should be a mirror. and maybe they feel that they're doing the right thing, but maybe they feel like, they're taking advantage. And I'm sure that there's some that feel either way. So I think that has a lot to do with, again, perspective. While we talk about the light side and the dark side of the Zetas within these three types, there are factions that fall on both sides of the coin. And we have to remember that every species should be seen in shades of gray until they reveal which side they appropriate themselves with. It's this thinking that will help us ascend, because we will see it's still up to the individual, and we still have free will, just like they do. They're no different than us. When we look at, these races from the galactical peoples, we feel that there's a polarization. They either have to reside on this side or that side. Doesn't matter. Why can't they just be like us, trying to figure out their way, right? Trying to do what they feel is maybe right, but it might not be right to everybody, because they're ascended majority of the time doesn't mean that they still garner the characteristics of humanity. Where do people think we get it from? Probably them, right? So I know I'm very high energy tonight, and I apologize for that, but this was fascinating research. My whole world and my whole perception of these entities got totally triggered and transformed. Like, what if I've been looking at this wrong my whole life? And it's because of another program that I sat here and persecuted. And I can honestly say that I did that. And I'm sorry to do that. Like, I really am. And it made me feel bad about it. But at the same time, now I have this platform to essentially bring what my understanding is. So maybe I can. I'm not trying to make everybody here a Zeta lover. I'm not trying to say that. I'm trying to show you that there is a perception that goes with it. We've been programmed for so long with places like Roswell and movies, and you know that it's difficult to grasp our own emotional fortitude to sit here and say, well, maybe it's not what we think it is. Maybe it's a little bit different. But let's keep going, because we have a lot more left to go, and I don't want to take up too much time. So now we have how the Zetas interacted with Earth. So the Greys are probably one of the best described and best known EBs there is. The extraterrestrial race in this group include the ubiquitous Greys from the star system Zeta Reticuli and the Orion constellation, who are described in most of the abductions research, right? They're figures who prominently are in reports of UFO crashes. Robert Dean included the Greys in as one of the extraterrestrials described in NATO's assessment. Colonel Philip Corso, who served in the Eisenhower administration and later headed the Foreign Technology Desk at the U.S. Army Research and Development Department, claims to have witnessed the body of a dead Grey retrieved from Roswell in 1947. What he saw fit the classic description of a 4 foot tall extraterrestrial with a large head, large black almond shaped eyes, thin torso, spindly arms and legs. Prominent UFO abduction researchers such as Dr. David Jacobs, Bud Hopkins, and the late Dr. Carla Turner have provided detailed case studies of the abusive aspect of UFO abductions. These researchers disturbing evidence of abusive treatment of individuals taken into UFO craft, of women being involuntarily subjected to genetic programming aimed at the reproduction of a human extraterrestrial hybrid, and of adult hybrids performing humiliating activities on female abductees. Many researchers agree that the Greys are deeply involved in developing a human hybrid Grey race that would be a suitable vehicle for the next step in human evolution, right? So these are reports, and this is why, and I said that for a reason, right? This is the programming that goes into our head. that makes us sit here and believe that they're so bad because they talk about select instances of the service to self side rearing its head out and abducting people. Now, is that majority of what we hear? Of course, because those are the ones that are going to bubble to the top of the pot. If this was a boiling pot of water, that would be what would raise to the top because people are inherently drawn to violence and gore because of other programmings, right? Because of traumas, because we're programmed to do that. So, this is where a lot of it comes from. Let's keep going. The Zetas are neutral concerning Earth and Earthlings. Part of their purpose is to preserve the Earthlings' largely untouched influence for the purpose of study. The simple fact is that the Earthlings' descendants, or EDs, humans, remind them an awfully lot of themselves. Not physically, of course, certainly not technologically, but emotionally. They hope that in watching and learning about humans, they can perhaps understand themselves a little bit better. So, in short, the Zaytans have two purposes here. First, to study the humans, observe and learn. And secondly, to preserve Earth in its natural state so that humans may continue unfolding on their own for good or bad, survival or death. This puts the Zaytans at odds with some of the other council member races, especially the Greys and the Dracos. But even with the Palladians, and though the Palladians and the Zaytans certainly get along and are quite civil with each other, especially these days, and they have been for a very long time, in wanting to preserve humanity and preserve Earth as it is, or at least not to at least not or hold back the hindering of outside influences. They are more than likely to support some rogue missions, right? Than they are the major groups. And that's why we see a lot of this manipulation happening with what we're talking about. This puts the Zetas into a difficult position, right? Actually, ideally, they want to study Earth totally and the nature of it, and and they don't want to affect it either. So in reality, because they are so already outside influences active here, they end up taking a very active hand and attempting to keeping these things the way that they are and to help restore things to the way that they should be, right? And so forth. Naturally, this causes a fair amount of criticism and expectation. And any result, it's gleaned that they are studying us for just the possibility of science, but for the possibility of consciousness. And however, they of course have detractors, but what they see is there's so much outside influence happening that they're trying to either stymie that to an extent or they're trying to enhance us to become aware of that influence. Now, they've been active on this planet for thousands of years. And we all know about yuga cycles. They're trying to make sure that there aren't any unnatural yuga cycles taking place. And it's a very complex system to study, but it's very worth the effort of understanding. And trust me, they're the ones who are going to help us usher more of who we are and more of who they see us as into this future. When we come in contact with all of these different races and see all the various motives coming from this one or that one, we're going to be stuck in the middle and we're going to want to be neutral too. They've kind of perfected that. Now, some people on this planet, like myself, will want to go with the Galactic Federation and, but do and see and be a part of all of it. Some people might not want that. Some people might want a small interaction, but that's cool, and then be done. Some people don't want that at all. Some people will say, "I want to go back to my 9 to 5." That's what's important. We have to be cognizant of all of it. So when we talk about galactical races, we talk about the Zetas too. And I'm actually going to go to the last slide before that. We talked about the hybridization program, but this is the universe. Look at it. This is where we are, right? We're here. The Syrians are there. The Zetas are there. The Nordics, the reptilians, the Andromedans. There's everybody. We're coming in as like the low man on the totem pole. So there's going to be a lot of people trying to essentially tell us how we should be or how we might not want to be, right? We have to understand that this is all part of the system. It's all part of taking the training wheels off and becoming who we are. So while I was initially motivated to sit here and say that the Zetas were they mutilated cows, their abductions were crazy, I had to pull back that veil of programming to help me understand who they could potentially be. And maybe majority of them are bad, but the ones that aren't could potentially have a traumatic or tremendous impact on who we're becoming, right? So we can't live and die by these polarizations. They're all bad, they're all good. It's never the case. Humans aren't all bad or all good. Every one of us has good and bad, right? We're all reside within the gray zone, which is the choice color of tonight's shirt. We all reside in the gray. We got to make sure that we control our thoughts to make sure that we're of service to others. And that's how we do it. We go internally and we understand ourselves to help those around us, right? And that's what sets us apart from the other people. And that's what sharing is. That's what giving out information. That's what we do because we want to empower people with that information. Like Phil Gruber says, the information is the activation. We are the ones that we have been waiting for. And if not us, then who? The world is hungry for this information. The world is hungry to get a better understanding of who and what we are. So it's our choice to share. And share we must. But that choice is what describes us. It's what makes us reside or align with those polarizations. It's that choice. It's our individuality, right? It's that choice that gives us the free will to sit back and do nothing or to step into the light and do everything. It's that choice. So choose to be more understanding. Choose to truly embrace the entire galaxy as it is. It's your choice. And that's it. That's all I got. I'm sorry for going on like a sermon. I didn't mean to make it like a religious rant, but I started to feel it, man. I just started to feel it, guys. Like it was really something else. Like I didn't expect to see what I saw in this information, and that's what makes it so incredible to me. But with all that being said, thank you everybody for stopping by this evening. Share this thing out. Let's change the world. Let's do this together. There's so much more coming down the line. I look forward to seeing all of it with all of you. From myself to everybody out there, I see you with love and appreciation and kindness. Thank you all.